at our third convocation. We continue to say we are a young institute. I guess as far as institutions go, where you count not in years but in decades, sometimes in generations, we are young. But we are now 5+, and I think we are at the stage where in terms of how we look at education, we have moved from the early stages into the regular school, you might say, as you get into a regular school at age 5 or 5+. And so we have, in some sense, in a very small way, beginning to come of age. You can see that by the fact, and this is a special pleasure and a delight, that we are awarding our first 2 PhDs. This is, I think, an exceptional achievement for an institution so young, but it's also reflective of what we have tried to do. As we've always said, this is a research-based educational institution, a research-based teaching institution. And I think nothing signifies more than the fact that we've emphasized research, emphasized our doctoral and master's programs, which have been of tremendous benefit to the bachelor's program. As the graduating students to whom I address most of my remarks today know, we have here an extraordinary and exceptional faculty. We've been blessed with getting people here who come from around the world with experience, knowledge, connections, networks from different universities, different institutions. And we are even happier to have a director who's been able to lead this institution so well in the few years that we are here. I do also want to acknowledge the role of the Delhi government. Today we don't have a representative from there in a formal sense, but they played a truly exceptional role. It's rare, especially in today's world and in India, to see a government which gives us the kind of autonomy, the liberty, the freedom that the Delhi government has allowed this institution. And I think I do want to, on behalf of what I would say probably is all of us from the institution, say a word of thanks to the Delhi government for allowing us to function freely and to function with autonomy and freedom. This is a board-run institution. It has truly been so. I must also say with some degree of pride that we have more than justified the confidence and freedom that they've given us. We have repaid that in ample measure by what we have achieved, and I know that many in the Delhi government are proud of this institution for what it's done. So I think there is a mutuality there. There is also a learning there for the government in many states and the center about how institutions need the freedom and autonomy to do what they do best through their processes, to let them try, succeed, experiment, sometimes fail, but come up with something good. And that's something that really in the long run pays off. A few words to the graduating students. I think from my perspective, the kind of advice that the director has given you has been truly exceptional. I hope you heard it carefully and digested it. This is something which you will carry back with you and think about many years in the future. I think it's extremely important. I just want to add a few words to what he said. You're stepping out into a world that's very different. And the way I look at it in terms of the dramatic difference is the world I grew up in and the world you're growing up in. A whole host of differences which I will not address. But one exceptional difference is the climate within the country, signified by many, many, many changes. But one change is certainly one where you begin to see actual things happening on the ground, and that's the change in terms of entrepreneurship. So many graduating students, so many students who have not even graduated are beginning to start up enterprises. And the kind of climate that permits this, allows this, nurtures it, has changed from what it was in earlier days. And therefore it's a matter of some pride that today when we see the space around us in the entrepreneurial area, you see startups from India. We used to read about this many years back about the kind of startups in countries abroad. And today in India you see the startups which are billion-dollar valuations. And very interestingly, a majority of these startups, I would say an overwhelming majority of them, have been started by technologists. They are not by people who come from necessarily a business background. They're people who come with ideas. They're people who come with technology. They're people who come with innovative thoughts. They come with knowledge. They put together a team and they take off. And we know many of these successes. Some have been, in the newspapers in terms of the big news that they have made, whether it's Flipkart or Snapdeal, or in completely different areas, whether it's a new airline like Indigo, whether it's something in a field which is again related but different, where you see a whole host of internet, mobile startups which have created great value and have got around the world. Or data analytics, a place like Mu Sigma, which all of you know about too. I think this is one dramatic change, and something which some of you might want to mull over. Not all of us have it in our blood to go out and do an entrepreneurial startup. Not all of us are necessarily interested. But I'm sure that many of you have thought about it, and I would say it's a great time to do something, to go out and try to do what you want to do now, or maybe after a few years of experience of working in the real world, of working out in industry and finding out what is there. But the opportunities are there, and the opportunities are no longer just outside the country, they're in the country. For those of you who are more inclined to a career in research, it's I think a sign of the times that so much of your batch has got great fellowships to go abroad and continue your work and continue research. It's also a sign of the times that both of graduating PhDs have got excellent jobs in research facilities. And I'm very happy about that, because that's what they did here, and they're going to continue to do it in industry, but in the research area. I think this is another path which is opened up for many of you, which didn't exist in my times. Neither entrepreneurship nor this kind of possibility existed, which is there. The third one, which is a continuation from earlier days, is for those of you who want to take a somewhat more conventional career path and get to regular jobs. The scenario has changed there too. The kind of opportunities that you have changed. The kind of jobs that you can take up have changed. The kind of growth and career prospects have changed dramatically. And there, much of what Pankaj mentioned to you in terms of hard work, doing the work which you enjoy, has special resonance and special kinds of thoughts which you might want to take with you. The important thing there, and the big difference I would say from much earlier times, is please understand that what you would call the half-life of knowledge has decreased drastically. What you learnt in your times here, in the 4 years, or the additional 2 years of your masters, or even those who have done a PhD, is not going to last you very long. The sell-by date of the knowledge you picked up here is going to be very soon. And therefore it's critical that you continue to renew your knowledge, to continue to learn, to build from the experience and abstract from that into the knowledge that you can carry forth elsewhere. This is critical, because if you stay where you are, if you stay only with the knowledge you have, in a few years from now, whether it's 3 years, 5 years or 10 years, you can find yourself unemployed. It's not just knowledge, it's professions that are changing. And I mentioned earlier times, in earlier times we had professions which people don't even recognize today. And a profession like a typist is almost dead today. People do their own work on the computer. And as all of you would recognize, probably in a few years from now, there'll be no profession called a driver, because you have driverless cars. That may take 10 years, 20 years, but it's indicative of how not just those skills, but as you move up the skill ladder, certain professions are going to disappear. As all of us know, coding is getting more and more automated, and without a doubt, in a few years from now, the whole idea of somebody who can just write code is not going to have a job any longer. So keep in mind that the changing world offers you phenomenal opportunities, but it also has huge challenges. And one of those challenges is, how do you keep up with knowledge? How do you keep up with the changing world? How do you keep up with professions that are dying altogether? And how do you make sure that the new opportunities that are being opened, the new professions that are opening up, the new possibilities that are coming, you can capitalize on them? This requires a lot of things, and I don't want to go through them. Pankaj mentioned initiative. He mentioned something which is very important. Enjoy what you're doing, because only then can you excel. And if you don't excel, it doesn't matter what you're doing. And I hope none of you, but maybe some of you will want to go and become a chef somewhere, start cooking. And you can earn fame, money, name, whatever you want, even in that profession today, but provided you excel. So it just doesn't matter what you want to do. Become a cricketer, become a tennis player, become a chef, become a fashion designer, and of course, hopefully, become an inventor, become somebody who starts a company. Whatever you do, but unless you excel, you will not be there. You see that even in the corporate world, new startups, if you're not among the top 3 or 4, you don't have much hope. So I think excelling is important. Initiative is important, which he mentioned. Apart from initiative, one more I is extremely important, and that's innovation. In today's world, doing what you do efficiently and well is extremely important and is rewarded. But efficiency gets you only so far. If you want to go beyond that, to move to the next orbit, you've got to innovate. You got to think differently. And this requires a mindset that's not only all the time thinking differently, but is trying to make connections between different dots. And this comes back to what I said about knowledge and its change. So it's not just upgrading your knowledge, it's in some ways also broadening your knowledge base. Even as you go into greater depth, breadth should not be lost altogether. Because it's only when you bring in analogies, connections, thoughts from one discipline into the other that you can sometimes innovate. The most brilliant innovations come from an analogy that comes from a completely different discipline, somewhere else altogether. And you bring it to your discipline and say, suddenly it's wonderful and you've got a solution for a problem that you were long stuck with. So innovation is something which you might want to keep in mind as you go further and look at what you want to do. It's also a word, which is very exciting in a different way. It's a word in which the ethos is changing. And today, one of those things which sometimes many of us from my generation worry about, I think it's an unfair worry in terms of whom you tend to implicitly blame, but it's a worry all the same. Have we got too materialistic? Is our single yardstick of saying how well a person is doing, is that yardstick just how much that person earns? Yes, of course it's important. And of course, most if not all of you would want to earn well and live a good life. But that can't be your sole yardstick. There have to be other things that go along with that. They have to be, even if you make all the money you can, what do you do with it? And I think we have brilliant examples from around the world, including many in this country, where people who have made it big and made it good have seen that they give back to society, that they care for others and they're compassionate. And I want to summarize this thought in one drastic change from the time I grew up in the world you're going into. And I would put it in an analogy which is somewhat strange, but something which you might see and hopefully resonates in your mind afterwards. When I was growing up, it was a word of atoms. It was a word of things. And in that word, if I give you something that I have, I lose it. It's in some ways, as you would say in mathematical terms, a zero-sum game. Because I have an object, I have something which is physical, it's the atomic word, and if I give it to you, I no longer have it with me. But you're growing up in a world of bits and bytes. And in this world, what you give doesn't go away. If you have some knowledge which is encoded software and you give it to somebody, it doesn't go away. It's yet with you also. It's a word of sharing without losing. And I think you've got to build this somewhere into your mindset as you look at the world as a whole in vast dimensions, not just in this dimension. That you are in a world where giving to others doesn't deprive you. In fact, it may well enrich you. And I think that change in mindset is something which you might want to keep in mind, not just in what you do in the world of IT, but in a much broader world of the community you live in, the people you live with, and where you are and where they are, and what can you do for others, where you give and yet gain. It's not a give and lose, it's a give and gain. I think that's a thought which I want to leave with you as you step out into the world. Finally, just a few words. I want to reiterate what Pankaj said so eloquently, that keep in mind when you go out of here that you yet belong to this institution. You spent many years here. We treat you as family, and please look at this as your home away from home. Come back here, enrich yourself, interact with the faculty, maybe come back as faculty someday, but continue to see how you connect to the institution. Part of that connection must be also how you come back and contribute to the institution. In cash, in kind, in many ways. Just bring in your knowledge, bring in your ideas, bring in what you can. But this connection should stay. Also keep in mind something which I like to reiterate to young people as they go out, that as you graduate out of here with pride and happiness, give a spare thought for those who made all this possible. Your parents and guardians, many of whom are sitting upstairs as you graduate from here, and their contribution. I think it's important that you think of that and not forget that as you go forward. Finally, the very best to all of you as you step into a new world. I hope you do well in whatever you want to do. I'm sure you will succeed, and I'm very sure that you will do very well and bring pride both to yourself, your family, and this institution. Wishing you all the very best and great fulfillment in all that you do. Thank you. It's my pleasure to now very briefly introduce our chief guest. I'll do that in just a couple of sentences. Mr. Sunil Munjal. All of you know of him, so as I said, no introduction is required. He's the managing director of Hero MotoCorp, a legendary company in India and now around the world. It's exceptional in terms of what it has done. It has flown the Indian flag in many, many countries and built in completely exceptional standards of excellence. For many, many, many years, I used to give the example of this company and this group as to what India can do when people talked of China and their efficiency, their infrastructure, their capability to produce something. I said, here is one company that actually outcompetes them in many areas. It started with cycles, and they do many other things. Mr. Munjal has been the driver of this, not just in terms of the business part of it, but in terms of how the company moves forward, what it innovates, and how it does things. In a brief interaction with the faculty, he was just mentioning something exceptional, and I know just one other Indian company that does something like that, and something which some of you might carry with you, and I want to mention this both to students and as an introduction to Mr. Munjal. He's the one who pioneered this concept of not only awarding those who come up with great innovations within their company, the great innovators who come with great thoughts, but also to equally recognize at an equal level those who tried something exceptional and failed. Because it's important to try big with a good thought. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work, you gain a lot of experience. He was sharing this thought with us, which I think is very, very important. Mr. Munjal, apart from his corporate hat, where, as I said, he's been exceptionally successful, and most of you would have read and heard about it, I just want to add one more line, that it seems to me, though he may or may not admit it, that today his heart is much more in a different area. He spends much more of his mind share, if not his time, in a different area, and that is education. Every time I've talked to him and I begin to talk about business, in about a minute or two the conversation veers around to what the education scene is, the university that he's founded and is helping to set up, and the broader area of education in India. So I'm very sure that he's going to be one of the major players and contributors in education too. Given that background and the tremendous success he's had in whatever he's done, it's indeed an exceptional honor and pleasure today to have you, Mr. Munjal, with us. And it's my pleasure now to invite Mr. Munjal as our chief guest to address us this morning. Thank you.